Is Nick Saban right about what he said with the College Football Playoff Committee? He said it'd be disrespectful if Georgia and Alabama were not to be represented in the playoff. If the SEC was left out of this year's college football playoff, he said it'd be disrespect. I agree. And look, he's not the only one saying it. Dean and I, we did a video talking about Stephen A. Smith's comments. I was watching a little bit of First Take the other day, and I don't watch it all the time. They were talking about some college football, so I was tuning in a little bit. And Stephen A. is screaming, "Are you guys losing your minds? Have you lost your minds?" Talking about the notion that the SEC would be left out of the college football playoff. I want to get that part out of the way because for this video, I want to discuss some scenarios. What would have to happen if Georgia loses to Alabama? Does anything else have to happen? Is Georgia just a lock for this thing? We need to discuss that. I think it's a possibility as well. I'm going to go through some scenarios. But first, I agree. Here's my statement to the College Football Playoff Committee, all right? Eye contact. This should be about the 4 best teams in college football. That is what the best possible product will bring us. It's really, at the end of the day, what people, I think, want. I don't think it's about, they deserve to be there. They deserve to be there. And it sounds like I hate Florida State. I really think it probably sounds like I hate Florida State. I don't think Florida State's one of the 4 best teams in college football, and a 13-0 Florida State, ACC champion, all that, with some ranked wins, is going to get in. Right? It's going to get in. And maybe, prove me wrong, Florida State, and really play well in the semifinal game against Georgia or Michigan. Because then you'll see the truth, probably. And here's the other thing. Leaving the SEC out of the college football playoff, the first time I heard someone say that, I laughed. That is not borderline. That is straight up ridiculous to think that Alabama or Georgia are not going to be in the playoffs this year, right? Because if Alabama's not getting left out if they beat the Georgia Bulldogs, are you telling me a company backed by Disney, a committee that works with ESPN and all this, and just, it really almost brings me, I'm struggling to talk. They would not leave Alabama out. I'm going to get away from my... They would not leave Alabama out if they beat Georgia. It is the Alabama Crimson Tide. They would be a 12-1 conference champion. All right, moving on. Georgia, scenarios. Ryan Curley from Dawg Post, the newsletter. I'm linking it down below. I'm frustrated in this video. I'm frustrated. I've got the newsletter, and I've got EcoPoly, our friends at EcoPoly, the outdoor furniture, the best outdoor furniture out there. Really, it's great stuff. I was sitting in one of those... I can't remember the name of the product, but it's the high chair. It's like a throne. You want to be a king? Sit in one of those EcoPoly thrones, like I would call them. All right, I'm linking their website down below. Georgia wins, they're in, and they're the one, no question. We're talking about Georgia being in the Sugar Bowl. But we do need to discuss the other playoff scenarios because the committee's nightmare is Georgia losing to Alabama because that's when it'll get really complex. How do we do this thing? Do we keep Georgia in? Do we have both of the SEC teams in again, even though there are other conference champions that might get left out? I think Michigan's going to beat Iowa. So let's play the game just because, dang. You're going to lose to Iowa after all that? So I'm going to predict that Michigan's beating Iowa. Let's just make that our lock for all these scenarios. That's stupid. We'll talk a little bit about it. If Michigan's out if they lose to Iowa. That is my opinion. Losing to Iowa is not the same thing as losing to Alabama. Georgia still has a chance if Georgia loses to Alabama. To me, Michigan would be out. I think the Big Ten would be out if Michigan loses to Iowa. It'd be hard to justify that. It'd be hard for me to justify that. I think the Pac-12's in. I think that the winner of the Pac-12 championship is a playoff lock. I don't really see how you don't put Oregon or Washington in there. Definitely Washington, 100% would be a lock. Oregon, I believe so as well, especially since they would have also played everyone. They've beaten everyone that they had played and avenged their only loss. So I think the Pac-12's got a spot. I think Michigan's got a spot. So those are 2 spots. If Georgia loses, the disaster scenario for the committee would be Florida State winning and Texas winning. What do you do with that? With the last 2 spots, which 4 teams do you give it to? To answer this question, it's tough. Who are the best 4 teams? Who are the best teams out of those 4? Would it not be Georgia and Alabama? Would it not be Georgia and Alabama? Is that really that much bias? My 5 would be Texas in that scenario, and my 6 would be Florida State. Plain and simple. Actually, my 6 would be the loser of the Pac-12 championship, and my 7 would be Ohio State, I guess. So I think that if that's the case and they're picking between Texas, Georgia, Alabama, and Florida State for those last 2 spots, I think it'd be Alabama 3, Georgia 4. I think that's how you'd have to put it. It's hard to see Georgia falling outside of the top 4. You think they would really move them down all the way to 5 below some of these teams? I get it. Okay, another scenario. I think if any of the other powers lose, Georgia's in. I think if any of the other powers lose, Georgia's in. Whether it be Michigan, Washington, or not Washington, but if any of Michigan, Florida State, and Texas lose, I think Georgia's probably in. That would be my guess. The thing with Texas and Florida State is that Texas, even though that the numbers and all look better than Oregon's, Oregon has looked better. Eye test. And I think the eye test has come into play a lot with Oregon. How you've played lately is coming in a lot to play with Oregon. Who was your loss to is coming into play. Those are the things that are being hyper-focused on with Oregon and Texas. Is Texas better than Oregon? I don't think Texas is better than Oregon. I see why people are saying that. I do think Texas is better than Florida State, and I'd put a 12-1 Texas in there over a 13-0 Florida State. Just being real with you. How much does Texas's head-to-head win over Alabama? How does that factor into this? It was week 2. There's a reason why they play these games. I think it has to matter a little bit, but then can you really justify Texas is better than Alabama if Alabama beats Georgia and has gone, done what it has done since it has lost to Texas? I mean, Texas has been good, and there's been a lot of close calls, and there's been a couple games where I thought they should have lost, and then they did lose to Oklahoma, who is not a great team. It's a pretty good team. It's not a great team, and Texas was the better team and it lost that game. Can we say that about Alabama and Texas? It didn't feel like it back in September. None of us were saying, oh man, the better team just lost today. Seems like Texas was better than Alabama back in September, and that is the part that you have to factor into this thing. It's not September anymore, though. It's November. And where does the Heisman Trophy get earned? It gets earned in November. When do these playoff spots get earned? They get earned in November. And Alabama looked really good in November outside of the Auburn game. So that's kind of my take on all that. On that part of the Alabama-Texas conversation. I think one of those two teams... I think Ohio State's out. I think all the powers losing would be getting Ohio State in there. And they dropped them to 6 for a reason. They dropped them below Oregon for a reason. So they view Oregon as a better one-loss team than Ohio State. And I think that told us a lot that the committee is maybe coming down off of the Big Ten a little bit. By not having Michigan at 1 over Georgia, even though it just had a top 3 win, a top 2 win at home. They dropped Ohio State to 6, and they still have Michigan at 2 behind Georgia. That tells me that the committee is cooling off on the Big Ten love, and the Big Ten love has definitely been there. But let's just recap real quick. Georgia should be rooting for another power to lose this weekend if they were to lose. But all of this to be said, well, this is all if Georgia loses. Otherwise, this conversation's not happening. And I get that, especially some of you guys, and I see the comments. I try to look at it and I try to respond to some of them. And I understand that some people don't want to hear about what happens if Georgia loses to Alabama. Let's just get this thing done. I think Georgia will get it done. The truth is they might not. And Alabama's a really good football team, and there's a lot of history in that stadium and between these 2 programs and those 2 coaches, and things happen. Crazy things happen. You saw the Iron Bowl. Crazy things happen in this sport. Crazy things have happened in that football stadium. And crazy things have happened in this game between these 2 teams, this specific game. So yeah, nothing is beyond possibility in this thing. And that's why we have to discuss the scenarios. I think that Georgia is one of the best 4 teams regardless of if they lose to Alabama, and that's kind of my piece with it. I think that they would be the 4. I think that Georgia would still be a better team than Texas and a better team than Ohio State and a better team than Florida State and a better team than the loser of the Pac-12. It's just plain and simple. What do you think? I linked those things down below. Thanks for listening to my rant.